All right, everybody, welcome back to the Film Schooled podcast. Josh, thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thanks for having me.
I am a big fan of having firsts on the show. And so I recently interviewed Katie Chonakis, who had the distinction of being the first person to be on the show who had shared a crack pipe with Nicolas Cage on screen. And you're the first person on the show who has been killed by Robert De Niro on screen. Well, by orders of Robert De Niro, but we're going to count it.
Yeah.
Can I go now, Mr. Pope?
Sure, you can go now.
Yeah, and I've also been killed by Nicolas Cage.
Stay down! What did I do?
Who haven't you been killed by? Because you put out your death reel. You've died a lot.
I die a lot. I got the face you want to kill, I guess. I end up playing all these villains, which is cool.
Filmmakers make films, but films make filmmakers. From blockbuster premieres to grindhouse theaters, late night cable to the local video store, there is no greater classroom for aspiring filmmakers than cinema itself. Join your host, Eric Skwarczynski, as he dives deep into the minds of legendary directors, producers, actors, and more to discover their biggest influences and to explore the impact their films are leaving behind. This is Film School. Grab your popcorn. Class is about to begin.
Before becoming the villain we love to hate in so many movies and launching your career, take me back to like childhood, Josh, like your first movie that ever made you fall in love with movies.
Well, my aunt, who watched me during the daytime a lot, she loves to bring up that I just really love Gremlins. And I still do. I think it was just such a rad movie, like that and Goonies, everything. Yeah, I have two older brothers, so everything they were watching, so they got into Star Wars, they got into Indiana Jones, and Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, right. Adventures in Babysitting. That was the one I was trying to think of, but also both of those films, and then all the John Candy movies and Uncle Buck and. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and just kind of the canon of the early or late 80s stuff, I guess.
When you were watching those movies as a kid and into like early teens, was it just purely loving the movies, or was there a part of you that said like, oh, I want to figure out how this is done, or I want to be in this? It's
funny because people have those stories of like, I knew I wanted to do this from day one. I didn't even have that idea. I had already graduated to like, I'm doing this. There was no like, I never had the idea that I all the stuff that came in between, actually ending up in movies, that was like, oh, that was a given to me. I feel right. Like.
For as long as you can remember.
Yeah, it was complete. It was completely naive. I had no idea what it was going to be, but I also just kind of knew I was going to make a life in the arts, and I was, it was very, privileged, I guess.
Did you have anybody else in your family that had pursued creative paths like that, or was this totally just an anomaly within your family?
Well, my brothers were both super creative. We all went to the same high school, and we all got kind of like the whatever superlative, most artistic kind of thing, which is like such a, it's both a gift and a curse, because you end up thinking a lot of yourself, and that thing became true. Like you're working. I did a lot of high school theater, and you get the leads in some shows and you think you're hot shit. And then you go to college and no, they don't want to use you for anything. They don't want to use you for one line on a show.
Right.
And so it's humbling. And, I started writing my own stuff and found a life in the theater when I went to college, and the kind of pieces started coming together a little bit more, and the kind of, the miserable reality of making a life in the arts started, materializing a lot more.
Yeah. As you started kind of pursuing that path and like it started becoming real in the sense of like, okay, this is actually, how do I do this? How do I climb this mountain and start working my way into this? I have to imagine you're approaching the things you're watching and reading, the people you're following, did you have certain actors or people you looked up to and thought like, okay, I want to be like that. I want to have a presence like that as you kind of watched movies and read certain biographies and started writing your own stuff?
Yeah, totally. I've always identified with, the character types, the character types that often play villains, the Steve Buscemi's, John Malkovich. I didn't have such a precious idea of acting.
Sure.
I think some of that kind of, I'm starting to develop that and understanding how important it is and how lovely it is. But at the time I just wanted to play shitheads and do they always played the most fun stuff. Even the villains in Goonies, I'm blanking on their names now, but even that stuff, it's just such a cool, it's so much more interesting than I think a lot of the cheesy, procedural sweethearts and which I thought I was going to do when I first started doing high school theater. I was like, oh yeah, I want to be the leads. I want to be, for instance, we did Oklahoma, and I can't sing, we did, I auditioned for Curly. I ended up playing Will Parker is his name. Is that right? I can't remember. Will Parker, I think is his name. And he's a little more gritty, and the choreography was changed because I couldn't dance or sing. Basically, everyone was singing and dancing around me, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this guy's like a little bit more interesting." The character types, and then going to school, and when you start kind of like working in the field, that it becomes very clear what people perceive you as. And,
sure.
Yeah. So
it's funny hearing that because like so many people, the stereotype is you want to be this leading man. You want to be the person who's, playing those cheesy roles where you're like black and white, and it's interesting. You went into it saying like, okay, I'm inspired by these character actors, which I agree. Like when you watch through certain movies or even when you're watching through a certain director's filmography, there's these certain character actors that they tend to use over and over again, who are the most interesting people in the movie. You mentioned Steve Buscemi, like he steals every movie that he's in, every scene that he's in. And, going into it, like getting into this field, what was your path from getting on stage, going to school to landing your first professional like on-screen role? What was that? Just a natural transition, networking and getting into that, or how did that play out?
No, it was actually there was a lot of struggle. It wasn't struggled off. It's all wonderful. Like everything was awesome along the way. Whenever like I really like looking back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, it felt like everything kind of happened exactly when it should have happened. And it still kind of
feel like that
way.
In the moment, or does it just feel like that in retrospect?
No, it did it in the moment. There was struggle, but there wasn't much. I think later now I can kind of get into this a little bit, but this might be tangential. But now that I've had some success and I'm making a living, I never thought I would make a living at it. It's really the bottom line. I thought I would be struggling and trying to just doing art for art's sake and loving it and it would always be a part of my life. And then so to answer your question, I started doing theater in high school. I went to Florida State and studied theater down there. And then I also studied creative writing. And I always kind of thought I would have an easier path in writing, and I would try and act and maybe write stuff for myself, and end up, whatever, with some dumb independent movie that nobody sees. And then I moved. My dad's health kind of started failing in 2010. I was in a touring band, and we were making no money, and really, it was soul sucking, but also life affirming. We toured all over the U.S. and it was awesome. But they were moving out to Austin, and I needed to be near my family, and so I came back to Atlanta. Then in 2010, I got an agent here and started getting sent out for stuff, and sent in some really terrible auditions the first year or two. And then I got my first job on BET's The Game, as a crackhead, a man in rehab. I hit up one of the characters for crystal meth, and then from there I just kind of kept. It was a slow climb, but I always felt exciting, and it always felt like kind of the right timing. Everything kind of, I had one line, I'd had a couple more one-liners. I booked a co-star, and then you book a recurring, and things just kind of happened pretty awesome. And a lot of that too was because Atlanta was burgeoning kind of at the same time, and Walking Dead was shooting here. But I always try and give credit to Tyler Perry, because he brought a lot of the industry here, regardless of the quality of the content he was creating.
Sure. Well, I definitely wanted to talk about the shift in Georgia itself, because now it's a mecca for film production at this point. Everybody is shooting there. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned the expectation of not having expectations. It was doing art for art's sake. You were in love with the craft. Do you think that lack of, I don't want to say urgency, but the lack of a need to make it right then, the understanding that you might just be creating art because you love creating art, and you might be doing something else on the side to support that. Do you think that lack of urgency is what helped you professionally, not having that expectation or this drive to do, A, B, or C?
100%. Yeah. I was doing, I started off doing, for my band, I started doing graphic design. And so I was doing that freelance, and that also can be soul sucking at times. And then I got into music videos, and I made music videos for my band and music videos for other acts. And that was, starting to take off. And then, once acting is the easiest of all of it. And I feel like, so the more acting becomes part of my life, the more shallow I feel, the more uninteresting I become. Because it is, I was talking about this with a buddy the other day. I did this movie Respect, which was about Aretha Franklin. And I got to play Roger Hawkins, who is this, who was Muscle Shoals' drummer. Muscle Shoals was kind of this notorious recording studio. And so I got to play a drummer in a movie. And I was having so much fun doing this thing. And I realized, I'm like, what is the difference of this and everything else I do? And the difference was that I was performing primarily with musicians, not actors. And there's nothing more, vapid than talking about actor struggles and that sort of shit. So yeah, I feel like, the more acting I do, and the less I concern myself with that other stuff and art for art's sake. The more kind of two-dimensional I become.
Like you mentioned, there's roles that are super enjoyable. There's roles, in films with casts that are incredible. You've gotten to work with some amazing talent, and even when you've had smaller roles early in your career, you'd share scenes with people who are heavy hitters, really successful actors. Did you ever feel overwhelmed or get that voice in the back of your head saying, like, okay, I'm in over my head, like I'm climbing into these roles very quickly, into these bigger and bigger projects? Did that fear ever creep in, or did that idea of like, am I ready for this?
I think I've just been so blindly naive. I think a lot of that, when I probably should have had those fears. And the truth be told, I'm starting to think a lot more about kind of the actor I want to be, and the type of art I want to create, and the process. It's strange, because coming from a theater background, you over process everything, because you have these long rehearsal process. So even if you have one line in something, you overthink it and naturalize it over the course of whatever, 4-week to 9-week to 3-month rehearsal process. And you think about that character's backstory and your relation to everything everywhere. And when you start booking that stuff in film, no one cares about that work. And a lot of times you don't have time to do that work. You hardly get a rehearsal. You don't get a rehearsal a lot of times.
Yeah.
Maybe rehearsal for camera, and you're able to step on your mark and say your line to a stand-in, and then they call in the number 1, 2, 3, and you're able to perform that scene and whatever. But so a lot of your early jobs are kind of undoing a lot of that work you did in the theater. Mm-hmm. And then, you get to a point where it's like, oh, okay, now I can start using the tools from this toolbox that I spent 4 years in school for 5 years in school for.
Do you ever find yourself longing to go back to stage where you have more of that prep time? Like, or is it just two different things to you? There's film and there's stage.
I haven't been on stage in, I don't know. I mean, I guess probably close to 8 years, which is terrible. So yeah, I would love to have more of a process, but when you're working film and TV, you could audition on Friday and get the job on Sunday and be working on Monday. And so it's really difficult to take something that does have a long rehearsal process, unless I have friends in town that are still doing theater, and they were pretty ingrained in the Atlanta theater community before they started acting in film and TV, and they're able to get understudies and stuff. But I don't have a foot in the door here. I don't know if anyone would give me that grace.
Yeah, I was curious on the perspective of the acting, because you talk about having that process, the 4 to 6 weeks, if it felt like a pure artistic expression, or if you didn't grade in that way, or if you didn't think of one as being more pure than.
Well, I was about to put my foot in my mouth and say that I really respect theater actors and folks that come from the theater, and you can sense that on like I did an episode of Creepshow.
Yeah.
And this cat, Christian Gonzalez, he came from the theater, and I sensed it immediately, right? Because there are ways to kind of cheat your way around working in film and TV, and do just enough to make it interesting but not be connected to the material. And I saw him doing the work, and that it immediately up what I was doing and made me care more about the process. But it's so infrequent that you run across actors that you recognize that in. But I don't know if it's a pure art form. There's a lot of folks making bad theater, and there's a lot of folks making bad TV and film.
Right. And a lot of people making good film and good theater.
Exactly.
Yeah, on the flip side. Yeah. No, Christian's actually was really great. That Creepshow episode I thought was really solid. I watched it in preparation for this episode. It was one of the things cool. I hadn't caught yet. And it was just a really neat episode. The tie-ins to I Love Me Dead were cool, but he was somebody that felt, one, it was interesting that he really fit the time period. I thought, like, he looks like he stepped out of a 1950s, 1960s movie. But he just had a really strong presence, and for an episode that largely takes place we're in one room, we're in a car, and then we're in another room, it still had this energy to it. That was really interesting. I'm curious with Walking Dead, because you talk about being an actor in Georgia. I mean, that did bring a ton of attention to that area for filming. That show, you came in on season 7. That show is like to horror Seinfeld was to comedy. I mean, it took over the world. It's a huge show. Coming into it at that point, how did that feel? Like landing a role on a landmark television series, you're 7 seasons in, the entire nation watches that show religiously. What were the emotions there?
It was, my first couple of days were actually pretty amazing, because I came in, we shot it as episode 703. It became 702, but the only series regular at that point that we were working with in those first couple of scenes was Lenny James, who is fucking awesome. I love that guy. And he was in Snatch, and I had just love that movie. But the nerves were a lot. It was a big relief, I think, to be walking into a show like that you knew had this notoriety, and then realize, okay, everybody else is new, so we're all thick as thieves now, and even
because all the other saviors were in those scenes in the beginning. Yeah,
so like Jason Warner-Smith, who is an Atlanta actor who played Gavin, we got really close through that process, and then Kari and Cooper, Carrie, Logan, who played Benjamin. Everybody they hadn't been established on the show because the kingdom and our group of saviors hadn't been established yet. So we didn't know what was going to come. Sure. And so that was really, really, really nice. And it made things very, very easy on that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of terrifying. Like, I think I knew I had wanted to work on the show. I like I said, my dad was going through health stuff, and I didn't really love watching dark stuff at the time. I was, I sooner watch Great British Bake Off or,
right.
Bob's Burgers or something. And so I wasn't super familiar with the world of the show. I had read the comic books and had seen the first season. So some of that too, I think sometimes, like when you work with big actors or you work on big shows, sometimes the scariest thing can be like watching their work, falling in love with it. Yeah. And then you're like clam up when you meet them, or you're working on it because you're like, oh, this place everything is so cool. Like it's exactly how I imagined it. And I just want to talk to you about like your amazing performance, and they're, whatever, going to Crafty and
you have Greg Nicotero, who's the executive producer of the show, directing you. So you're not even getting some newbie director. You're getting someone who's part of this well-oiled machine at this point. Yeah.
And I had spoken about this a bunch too, because it was so cool because we were establishing characters, and Greg was there to be like, okay, that's cool, that's not cool, or whatever. And for me, he I was playing a pretty douchey character, and so he kept kind of like upping the stakes. He kept telling me to really lay into that. Oh yeah, do more in that direction. And so when the showrunner, executive producer, or whatever, producer, executive producer, co-creator, those folks are handling that stuff and giving you direction, you're like, okay, this is gospel. Like I don't, whoever may come in next in line in the director's chair. Like Greg told me, this is how he wants the character, portrayed or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wanted to ask, I had heard you on another podcast talk about Greg kept telling you to amp up, how villainous you were. And I messaged my mom yesterday and said, hey, I'm doing this interview tomorrow. I'd been watching a bunch of your movies and really good research, getting to look through a bunch of different movies and watch some of your episodes. And I asked her, I said, do you have any questions? And she only wrote back one question. She said, did the directors give him motivation to explain why he's such a wang in the show? That was her exact quote.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day. I guess I have developed my particular brand of like douchery, and I didn't realize that. You just never know. Like there's because and that's like an amalgam of actors I've loved and bullies who were terrible to me and being terrible to other people and seeing how they responded to that thing, not intentionally, but just, being a piece of shit and not realizing it or whatever.
Right.
But that, you do have a brand of kind of everything you put out. And so my brand of like douchebaggery, I guess can get under people's skin. And I realized that too. Like, anybody that has brothers, like you develop that thing pretty quickly, especially if you're a younger brother. And
as a younger brother, I know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's, to me, that's the best characters in these, especially in zombie movies, and I don't know I'm sure you've watched George Romero's movies and work on Walking Dead. At least I'd hope so. Getting to know. Oh man,
tough, man.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But like you look at these characters who they're not going to last through the series. They're going to get their comeuppance in a big way. And it's so fun watching, a Day of the Dead and watching Joe Pilato's character, eating the scenery and being this very villainous character, because it makes the death so much more satisfying. And totally. And it's funny looking at YouTube comments on any clips of you. It's like, I hated him more than Negan, or I couldn't wait. And you watch the death scene and it's so satisfying, but it's proof that you did your job in that role in such a cool way. And, you made it through 2 seasons in various episodes, which is a long time to survive in that show. Did you have any idea that you'd become such a mainstay character, or when you signed on, you could have been gone that first episode?
Yeah, I don't think they knew. I don't know. And I constantly think, well, not constantly, but I occasionally think, if I would have played my cards a little different, I may still, be able to be around. But I had no idea. When I read for the thing, I read for Gavin and Jared and also a handful of other characters on the show. I had read, I think maybe 17. I think I looked up at one point, and I think it was 17 different times that I had read for Walking Dead, starting in season 3. And finally booked Jared, and it said may recur. And so we kind of knew after our first scene and how kind of intense that scene was that we would likely recur. But they kind of, for actors who are just getting on the show and maybe kind of these smaller roles, they just kind of give you a big window. And so it's like, it was essentially the whole window of the shoot, which is whatever, I think they shoot for 9 months, shooting 16 episodes. And, just had no idea. So it was kind of like, hey, touching base with, because I worked what was shot as 7:03 and then didn't come back until 7:10 and 7:13. So that was basically a 2-month gap where I'm like every day stressing, texting my team, like, hey, have y'all heard anything about this? Am I coming back? Like, I would love to come back. It seemed like I was going to come back. Maybe they forgot about this very important storyline that we need to re-examine, anything that you could do to force their hand. And, I really loved doing it. And then when I made it out of season 7 and I wasn't dead, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I'm coming back. And then once it started getting to the end of season 8, I was like, oh shit, this is, oh man, I'm going to make it, And then of course you get the call from Scott Gimple, and I had to ask him too, somewhere along the line, like, should I try and tie in any sort of like redeemable quality to this terrible guy? And
because you pushed for that, right, to redeem the character in some way, or
anything to stay on a show like that, because it was so cool. I mean, it really was so cool. And I was frustrated, like I'm saying, that everything is you have all this training, and you get all the all the kind of jitters out working a couple episodes and the excitement, and then and you still, even when you have like a big episode like 8:14, my death episode, the turnaround was relatively short. So I only had about a week or so to work on all that material, and I was cutting a new reel. So I cut a reel. I try and cut a new reel like every year, and I was watching through my stuff on the show, and I'm like, oh, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing? You fucking dunce. Like, you had such an opportunity, and and really that's the wrong way to think about it. It's like,
sure.
Because even when you're saying lines, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm not connected to this. I don't, this isn't exactly how I'm not feeling it. I'm just saying something, So long story short, I think I left some stuff on the table there.
When you get that call saying, hey, we've got to kill you for the story, we're taking it this direction, was that a gutting thing to think like, okay, this is it? And then having a week and a half to close it out, did you feel like, frustrated or disappointed, or was it just, another day at work and then, on to the next?
No, it was, I felt complete gratitude that I had been able to stick around that long and had been able to had the opportunity to get under people's skin and to have, because I had 3 episodes in season 7, I had 11 altogether. So 7 episodes in season 8. And, it's amazing to be an actor of my level. When you get something that's recurring and you can count on a job and, you don't get killed off and you can come back to something and see all those same people and it's a friendly atmosphere and a creative atmosphere. It's just so cool. And so I was so happy and so gracious that the powers that be let me do that for so long, or whatever, 2 years. And it's like, and they, the gift, I think they realized too, what a gift it is. Cause I was able to do conventions and that's a nice, part of you wants to hang on to it. And I just recently unpinned something on my Twitter. It was a Walking Dead kind of gift. And I was like, man, I've been off the show since 2018. It's time to move on, man. You can do other stuff, and you are doing other stuff. Celebrate that stuff. And, but it was such a gift. I didn't feel any sort of animosity or any oh man, I thought I was going to maybe work 2 episodes.
Yeah. Well, was working with Greg Nicotero on that show kind of what opened the door to Creepshow? Because it seems like a lot of the same crew I know from Walking Dead, has worked on Creepshow, and it's again, that's another show that's built a huge cult following. Was that part of that, or was that just a random happening? I went and auditioned for this and it happened to be the same world a little bit.
No, it was, I had no idea. I had been reading for Creepshow because Tara. So there's a couple kind of bigger casting houses in town, or casting groups. But the Fincannons cast Walking Dead, and so they cast me on that thing. And then some Tara and Chase, who are Feldstein Paris, they cast Creepshow, and I had developed a rapport with both of those folks, obviously thanks to Walking Dead, and then Tara and Chase cast me on Game Night and Stuber and Black Lightning and a bunch of other stuff. No, maybe not Black Lightning. Yeah, Black Lightning. Anyway, they I knew they were casting the thing, and I had been getting reads, but you just never know what's happening to those reads. They may be disappearing to the ether, and I really, you get killed off in a show and you don't hear from them. I just had no idea what my rapport was with. And I would see Greg occasionally at conventions, and be like, "What's up?" But then I saw him at I guess the last Walker Stalker convention, which was this thing that would happen in Atlanta, and they it was primarily Walking Dead folks, and I saw Greg, and he was like, "Oh man, I love some of your reads for this." I think maybe then season 1 of Creepshow, and I was like, "Oh shit, you saw them? Like, I can't.
They're going somewhere. They're getting delivered.
Yeah.
Good."
Yeah, exactly. And he was like, "Yeah, we wanted to get you in on this one and this one, but things didn't work out." I'm like, oh man. And then kind of in the same way I feel about Walking Dead, like, everything I had read up to that point, it was completely forgettable when you finally get the right role for you. And I was so grateful that the Creepshow episode, I just thought it was so cool, and being shot in black and white and working with John Harrison, the director, and Christian, I was like, I wouldn't have wanted any of those other ones.
John Harrison is such a legendary, force in that world, and getting to work with Nicotero again is amazing. And it's a very memorable episode, and it with any anthology, there's always duds, and there's always the fear of like, is this one going to be this? And that specific one is such a great standout episode. Going from like Walking Dead, which has a Walking Dead budget, and then going into Creepshow, which I interviewed Joe Lynch, who directed a couple episodes. He talked about how the micro budget, episodes there that you're delivering these huge concepts. Did it feel a lot different or jarring going from mega production to having a couple days to shoot?
No, I think you kind of get that sense very early when you show up. It's, you know, you a lot of times you show up for a fitting and you realize, okay, this is the kind of production, this is kind of the tier or the budget that we're working with. Walking Dead, I don't know if you get this sense. I mean, I think they're very frugal and they do a lot with what they have. And so it never felt like the only thing I've worked on that I think felt like massive was Ant-Man and the Wasp. Like they, you know, you walk into a Marvel set and it's just like anything they would ever want is there. You know, it's like it's Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for filmmakers. Right. It's just like, you know, anything you could possibly want is here, and you can utilize it at any point, and we'll also have the CGI to back up any idea you happen to have in passing and have the budget to support that. But Walking Dead actually felt like amazingly kind of small scale and comfortable. Very
family kind of environment.
Yeah. And a lot of that was because of the nature of the way they shoot that show. And a lot of it's outdoors and it's rugged and kind of miserable. And we shot on a pretty hot day, and, you know, all the guys, everybody's suffering through it together. So it does kind of bring folks together. And Creepshow's all on stage.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can kind of tell by the scope of the episode, like, okay, this is black and white, a couple of locations, like you said, a couple of locations. And, you know, it's not jarring. It's kind of like the playground you're playing in.
You mentioned not wanting to watch a lot of dark stuff, you know, during the period you're doing Walking Dead, but you've been in a lot of movies that have very dark themes. So you know, Last Shift, which has its own crazy cult following to it as well. You know, Intruders, you know, you've got a long laundry list of villainy and darkness. And then the other mix is a lot of comedy, you know, Righteous Gemstones, Game Night, Stuber, you mentioned. Do you have a certain genre you like playing? And I know you like playing, you know, a certain type of character. Do you prefer being in horror or comedy, or are you, does everything have its own interest to you and it's in its own way?
I just love working. I love working, and I love working on good scripts. So and, you know, with awesome actors. So like, I mean, I would love to do more comedy, but I've realized more and more I'm not funny. It's like comedy is very difficult, especially when. So I had a read for a comedy feature that's coming up in January, and I had a callback for it. And I was thinking back on the callback, and I was like, was anything I did actually funny in that thing? Like, you know, because there's nothing less funny than trying to be funny.
Right.
And trying to make this thing funny, I was like, I don't think I got there. It's a lot easier. And like even in Stuber and Game Night, I'm playing the straight man. Like, one of the things that this kind of embarrassingly on Game Night, John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein, who wrote that and directed that, they kept being like, yeah, man, less of that kind of like chipper, funny stuff. Cause I'm like on a comedy, you know, so I want to rip.
Try to be funny.
I got some funny stuff prepared. I'm going to drop some funny lines. And they'd be like, no, less of that. It's important for you you're the straight man. Everybody else is funny around you. For the kind of, you know, the gravity of the situation to, you know, feel real, you need to be kind of mean and miserable and terrible, you know. Right. And that same thing has happened in Stuber. It's like, and it makes a lot of sense. It's like, they're the funny ones. Let them be funny. You do your same villain, terrible douchebag, you know, whatever.
Sure.
Sociopath shit.
Well, before we move here into the rapid round, like I said, you've been in a lot of different projects, you know, many of which have cult followings. You know, I mentioned Last Shift. Some have very strong followings, have conventions like Walking Dead. For you as an actor thinking toward the art, or you as a performer, which of your roles or projects do you think best represents you? Like when you think about like, this is my stamp is on this, what comes to mind?
I mean, I do feel, just because of the scope of the thing and the fact that I got to do a number of episodes on Walking Dead, I do feel precious with that even though I'm in retrospect, I feel like I could have done better and could have done more.
Sure.
I do feel like that was nice to play a character that I think did have kind of a life and was interesting enough and got under people's skin. That was cool.
Yeah.
But some of the project, like I loved Righteous Gemstones. I had 2 episodes on that. And
I love that show. Yeah.
God, dude. And I was like hoping so badly, and I almost thought about reaching out to some of the team and being like, "Hey, I play drums. Like, it'd be pretty awesome if Daedalus or Daedalus or whatever became like part of the praise band." and I really I wanted to push that, but I'm not very good at that sort of like, when they let you know what the story is, they're writing that thing that you don't want to you don't want to slight yourself out, or I don't know, just be annoying to people. So I was really hoping I'd come back to that, but I had such a dream, it was such a dream playing that. And it felt naturally funny. That's
a show like Walking Dead where literally anything can happen in a very different way, but it's something where, getting to play against, someone like Adam Devine, is like so funny. Like that show, my other podcast deals with a lot of like religious background. And so I forget who had recommended it to me. And they said, because I'm always talking about like different church backgrounds and things like that. And they're like, you have to watch Righteous Gemstones. And I was watching on a plane coming back from a trip for the first time. And like, I was like covering my mouth like a little kid, trying not to laugh, like watching the episode. It's so funny.
But, and growing up in the South, and, I even, because I grew up Catholic, and, even the Catholic Church succumbed, I don't know, to like the cheesy. There was this whole like cheesy, like, oh, we're gonna play acoustic guitar and have drums in the band and like whatever, and like the teen worship service and stuff, and you're just like, this is fucking ridiculous. But there was this church down the road called Church in the Now, that we all refer to as Cult in the Now, because they had like I had never made it over there, but I saw pictures, and there were kids at my school that would, like be sucking that place's dick. And they would talk about like, oh, they got like a whole arcade and pinball machine. I'm like, that sounds like badass, but that does not sound like church. And,
right.
And if it doesn't sound like church, but it is church, then they're trying to manipulate you, man. Like you don't know.
It's such an interesting show. And again, like that's what's really cool. Like going back through, and like I said, I watched a lot of your work, just trying to, get a good feel. I'd already seen so much, and I'd seen Game Night, I'd seen, and then going back and watching, I watched Intruders and watching through parts of Walking Dead and watching through, active shooter and a bunch of different, which that active shooter feels very much like a play, the way that it's structured, the one room environment. But it was just cool seeing that variety, of different performances, and Righteous Gemstones being a very bizarre, even for you, like being fully painted out and like doing those roles is super cool. I'll go ahead and move us here into our rapid round. Just a couple quick questions. And like I said, I call these a rapid round, but we always end up getting stuck on some of these. But first off, who do you think is the most underrated actor working today?
Oh, man.
I told you that these are where we get stuck. So I start them earlier and earlier each episode.
Oh, God. Underrated. Oh, that's tough. Because, like, naturally you want to do. There's a lot of folks in even the Atlanta market that I'm like, okay, they're ready. Well, yeah, I have plenty of friends that I think are underrated, but gosh, that's tough. Oh, man. Yeah, I'll ponder on it. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. We'll circle back in a
That's
second.
tough because I really want to give a good. That's a good question, and I want to give a good answer. I don't know. I don't think about that so much. Like, this person deserves. I feel like everybody that plays it this long enough, if they're good and they, they commit themselves to the craft and whatever, they'll have their day. And so I don't feel like anybody's being overlooked completely.
Is there someone you've worked with that you think is about to blow up, or someone you think we're going to know their name in the next?
So, actually, okay. So have you seen Dope Sick?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's great on Hulu. It's fantastic. Michael Keaton is so fucking good. But the guy who I worked with, Ray McKinnon, on, he's the creator, writer, showrunner of Rectify, which is this completely underrated show that was on Sundance TV and AMC and went to Netflix. And I think it's still on Netflix. And I was able to. He's a Georgia boy. The show was based in Georgia about this guy who gets out of prison for a murder he may or may have not committed, and kind of like the fallout from trying to reassimilate into the community. And it's really fantastic, and it's a slow burn. And but Ray himself is a fantastic actor, and he's in Dope Sick, and he fucking kills it. If he doesn't get an Emmy nod for a supporting actor role, or any sort of accolade for what he did in this show, it'll be a complete travesty. He's so good.
What's a movie that fans of yours would be surprised that you enjoy? So people that know your persona and who you are on screen, is there a certain movie that you tend to pop on, or a certain show you love that they'd be like, wait, this guy likes this? This is
I mean, I love Pixar stuff. I want to write Pixar movies. I've written children's theater, and I've got some children's plays published and stuff. And I just love, which is, it's tough because I'm actively, like, whenever I work, I'm actively pushing my persona, or my public persona, in the opposite direction. It's like no one wants to perform the kids play that this guy who played a rapist on 18 other movies, like, they don't want to do that stuff. But I love, like, Coco, whatever. I could cry just thinking about Coco. Yeah. It's such a well-made movie, and so close to my heart. So many of those films are Incredibles.
Yeah,
Finding Nemo. Yeah, all of it.
No, I resonate. My wife laughs because I love hardcore, like, horror, like, that's my jam. And so, which was a great fit. As I was looking at your filmography, I was like, there's a lot of movies here that I'm like just crossed on my list that are great. Oh. And but on the
I would never watch them if I wasn't. And I
so
don't
funny.
Watch them. Like the horror films, I don't watch them. Yeah,
that's funny. Because that's right up my alley. But on the flip side of that, we watched. I'm going to blank on the name. Soul. And we were like 2/3. We weren't even like in the third act of the movie, and my wife looks over, and I'm like, tears streaming down my face, and she's like, "Are you being serious?" Like, she's like, "Are you joking?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "How are you not crying at this movie?" And but it's always I love hearing people's perspective that's totally contrary, because I think someone who watches your persona would be like, "Oh, he loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre and like Rob Zombie movies," and it's like, you're like, Pixar, I think Coco is awesome. So,
well, I think I say a bunch, and I'm still testing out this theory, but I think a lot of folks that play villains and play them decent know what it's like to be treated poorly, and wow. So that's a testament to who, their growth as a human being, and you kind of develop the feel for what gets under people's skin and what makes people feel shitty, and it's a lot of fun to do that in a joking way. It's that thing where, like, you're in a disagreement with somebody and they say something really sharp, and you later in the 2 days later wake up and battery, but later wake up and you're just like, oh, that's the perfect thing to say, for folks that pine over that sort of stuff, I think those folks end up playing villains because it's like, oh, the words are there for you, and the feeling is there because you have that sadness and that hatred or whatever.
No, that's so true. And you hear about that when it comes to people in horror movies, because they talk about like, I was bullied, so I resonate with being the creature that was like misunderstood, or you talk about the kid who was never believed when they try to go to somebody and tell them something. So that's an interesting perspective on it. If you were given the green light to remake any film, I know you love writing, I know you love acting, obviously. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
Oh man, I actually I'm a lot. It'd be tough because I'm a purist about a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. So but I think Gremlins is due for I think Joe Dante should do it. I wouldn't want to direct it. I would love for Joe Dante to have a resurgence and be able to do Gremlins. Whatever 3. There's not a third one, right?
No, just 2.
Yeah, just 2. Yeah, the new batch is fucking awesome.
Two is so good, and it's so ahead of its time in the way that it's ahead of its time for all of the Trump analogies, but it's ahead of its time in so many ways, like how on the nose it is, like the way it parodies the first movie. It's just a ton of fun, and even like the new Space Jam came out, and I was watching. I was like, Joe Dante did this so much better with the Looney Tunes movie that he did. And he's got such a great eye for that cartoonish like violence. And it's so much fun to watch. I'd love to see a new Gremlins with him.
And that salad bar Gremlins, like just every time, and whatever I think it does really appeal to folks that have a cartoon background or just love, because there is a moment, right, where one of the Gremlins is like, "Hello, my baby," right?
Yeah, right.
He does like the ragtime gal.
Yeah,
it's just great.
That's a great choice. And what do you think is the best decade of film history?
I was talking about this the other day. I'm like so poor considering I work in the craft. Because in this kind of on par or on the same lines as like not realizing that I would have a life in film and TV, but I'm so poorly versed in the canon of films. I mean, it was bonkers. The thing I think about a lot is it's bonkers to me that No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood came out the same year and were up for Best Picture. And No Country got There Will Be Blood got Best Picture, No Country got Screenplay or something. I don't know. But both amazing movies. I don't know. It's that's a tough one too. I think referencing Star Wars and Indiana Jones and whatever late 70s, early 80s.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know though.
And the last question here, I like to ask everybody that comes on the show.
What is yours? Do you have one?
I have to say 70s. I'm always tempted to go 80s because I mean, there's just a billion blockbusters that are just like define what we think of when we think about movies. But I mean, the 70s was such a cool period of just filmmakers getting permission to just break all the rules and the amount of crazy like Taxi Driver, and you've got all these Scorsese really killing it during that time. But and Jaws with Steven Spielberg, but then you've got the 80s where you've got, the Back to the Futures, you've got these movies that you can't imagine. Like when you say the word cinema, you have visions of some of those films that came out during that time. And so it's hard to say. I would say like end of the 70s, early 80s would be it. Because I think the late 80s and early 90s got so commercialized where a lot of the artistry got lost, just like, some of the movies in the early 60s still had that 50s veneer of just safe and cookie cutter, until you get to Hitchcock Psycho, 68, where it's like, oh, we're going to break some rules and get in trouble with the ratings boards and, push some of the envelopes in our themes a little bit. But, it's a hard one. And it's a question, like, even when I hear people give their answer, I'm like, they're right. It should be this, or it should be this time period.
I don't know. I tend to not think about movies too in the time period they were made a lot of times. I don't have that bigger that bigger picture kind of situation, I'm like, oh, that was a good movie. That was a good thing. And I would watch it. I would watch The Godfather again. Worth seeing twice.
Yeah, at least twice, I think would be good.
Yeah, at least twice. Yeah. But well, it's funny. Oh, actually, Alan Rickman too is an actor I'd always cherished and everything. I'd seen, so thinking about like Die Hard and his performance, and I like just wanting to play a villain like that. I think that was kind of formative to who I, aspired to be as an actor.
And he's such a good straight man too. I mean, because you mentioned him, and the first movie that comes to mind is Galaxy Quest, like him playing such a straight character in that comedy, but he's so ridiculously memorable, and he's not doing this over the top goofy, like, performance. He's playing this very strict, like Shakespearean, actor, which is so much fun to see. The last question I ask everybody that comes on the show, because there are people listening to the show who are aspiring actors, filmmakers, directors, writers. So you can specify to actors. But if you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring filmmaker, what would it be and why?
I'm a big fan of, and I'm trying to rekindle. I'm sorry. Well, all right. So I'm a big fan of kind of developing your group. A lot of I've tried really hard to stay in touch with the filmmaker friends that I connect with, and I think when you get on something, you get on Walking Dead, or you get on a Marvel movie, or you even end up in the same room as some of these people. You start thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to become friends with that person and they're going to make my career. And it's like, no, that's not the way to go about it. Keep creating, trust yourself, and keep creating good art with your friends. Keep developing stuff with your friends and folks that you meet, that you connect with. But like that, when I worked with Robert De Niro, I knew he's got enough people that want his attention and his time, and deservedly so. He has those. He's developed that circle of folks that he trusts, especially this long in their career. And if they take a liking to you for some reason or another, and they think you're a decent actor or whatever, that's awesome. But like, don't expect that thing to happen. Keep working on your community and the folks that are, I always talk about, it's like soul siblings with the folks who create art that you like and you want to work with for the rest of your life.
Well, there's a beautiful element to those relationships versus just networking for the sake of networking and trying to climb a ladder, and jumping. Right. And, even you mentioned De Niro, like we think of De Niro and Scorsese now, but, there were probably a lot of people that didn't believe in De Niro when he was making A Taxi Driver. That's a circle that's been maintained, and a relationship that's been maintained for decades now. De Niro and Scorsese, or, fill in the blank with whoever you want that to be. And, I think it's so important, like you said, to invest in people in your circle that you resonate with on a deeper level and just do good work. Like you mentioned for Creepshow and Walking Dead, I'm sure you can tell the story for a lot of other things. Walking Dead, you started reading season 3 and got the part, way down the line, seasons later, where you're wondering, is this going through Creepshow? Are they even seeing my audition tape? Are they even seeing the work I'm doing? But that persistence, and like you said, without the expectation, like just doing the work to do the work and doing that consistently is going to take you somewhere that, just trying to get De Niro's attention when you're in this scene with them, it isn't going to necessarily do for you.
Yeah. And even the interaction I had with him too, finished the scene and I felt like I had an all right day, but like nothing to knock anybody's socks off. And he was like, "You're a good actor." And like, of course, I can't even do a good De Niro, like just completely undermining everything. But, he knows that everyone wants to hear that from him,
right.
Yeah. And so I don't, you can, you take it with a grain of salt. Like
I have goosebumps hearing him tell you that, you're a good actor. Okay. Like, I mean, that's huge. That's huge coming from someone like that,
Yeah, right. So I didn't let it, because looking back on that particular performance too, I know, well, it was a funny day. It was this movie called Heist. Yeah. We were supposed to shoot this kind of scene. I'm like tied up, and he has Morris Chestnut kill me in this storage container or whatever. And we were supposed to shoot this thing early in the day. And like, I had gotten there, and I knew my character was going to be kind of like crying and miserable. And then the thing keeps getting pushed. And so we were supposed to shoot it before lunch, and it was like, oh, we're going to shoot it after lunch. And then eventually the whole thing gets bumped to the end of the day. And by that point I had been like I'd been crying all day, trying to get myself to a place where I could cry all day. And I was emotionally exhausted. And so I just, I had to fake it. And I think at one point I even had a lemon in my pocket, because I'm like, oh, you're about to have a scene with the biggest actor like fucking ever. And, so I was just wiping lemon in my eyes so it looked like I was crying. And then eventually we started doing the scene, and it started coming a little bit more organically, and I started getting there, but not completely where I was in the beginning of the day. And so I knew there was a lot of forcing going on my part, in the kind of circumstance of like performing for Robert De Niro. So I didn't take what he said with complete, that wasn't complete truth to me. I was like, I wanted to hear that. Everyone here wants to hear from Robert De Niro that they're decent people. Just kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, I really appreciate the advice, and I know the audience does as well. And, I'm excited to see what you do next. Like it's amazing. Like even just scrolling through IMDb, one more time, just refreshing myself on some of the names. It's cool seeing the projects you're working on, the stuff that's, all the different roles, all the different types of movies. I'm excited to see where you go next. And I can sincerely say, it's been a blast going through and watching your performances in so many different types of movies. I know I'm not De Niro. You're a good actor.
Thanks, man.
So take that to heart.
Is that you can always get better, and the older you get, the more you understand the human condition, and it does get, it opens up kind of new avenues of character for you. So awesome. I'm excited about what's to come too. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Hopefully Righteous Gemstones season 2 will make it happen.
Oh, well, they already shot it. I can't, maybe season 3.
I don't know. They may need to do a reshoot or a pickup. They're gonna call you, be like, we need to do it. But
let's just cut it. Yeah, cool, man.
Thanks for listening to the Film School podcast. If you appreciated the content on the show, don't forget to leave a 5-star review and hit subscribe so you won't miss a single episode.